Good morning. Welcome to all of you. We are gathered here this morning in the presence of God to remember and to give thanks for the life of Fritz James. And what a long and remarkable life it was that we come here today to celebrate. Looking around, it is pretty obvious that Fritz was someone who was loved by a great many people and respected by a great many people here in Des Moines and well beyond this community. And your presence here today is a wonderful testimony to that. Right after the service is over today, take note that there will be a reception down at Mainframe Studios, not too far from here, downtown, an opportunity to visit with the family, to enjoy sharing stories, sharing memories, continuing to celebrate and honor Fritz's life. All of you are invited and welcome to attend. As we begin our service this morning, let us do so in a spirit of prayer. Eternal God, you are the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the source and destiny of all things. We come here today and lift up all the different emotions in our hearts at having had to say goodbye to Fritz earlier this month. We were all blessed to have had him in our lives. Comfort us in our sorrow. Be near to those whose lives seem so much emptier because of this loss. Sustain them, walk alongside them, and lead them through this time of grief to a place of hope and a place of healing. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, here now a reading from the book of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, the late, great Jewish writer Elie Wiesel put it like this: God made man, he wrote, because he loves stories. And wow, do we have some stories to tell today about this man, don't we? In my visits with him, I so enjoyed hearing him tell some of the wonderful stories from his life and reading through his memoirs, which he had so beautifully crafted and put down in writing, and later hearing the stories his kids shared about him. I kind of feel like God made Fritz James because he loves stories. His story began, of course, right here in Des Moines, just a few blocks away from here, in fact, over on 31st Street, in the home where he was born and grew up. And from an early age, you could see how some of the seeds were already planted that would later grow into the different aspects of his life that were so much a part of who he was. As a kid, Fritz enjoyed the freedom to be able to explore on his own. He said he was kind of the original Thunderbolt kid, a decade or two before Bill Bryson, riding his bike around all over Des Moines, or taking the streetcar, going to the varsity to watch cowboy and Indian movies, or going to Botter's for ice cream. And he loved being able to explore the natural world as well, climbing trees, walking along the stream, going down to the Raccoon River, exploring the woods behind his house with his dog, Nora. That all cultivated in him an appreciation for the beauty of nature. His family at the time wasn't wealthy. They had to watch every dollar pretty carefully, he said. But young Fritz became something of an entrepreneur. He had a paper route, mowed lawns and shoveled snow for $1. He started going around to the neighbors, asking if they had bottles to return to the store for a nickel each. He collected all of these bottles, would take them in. The people at the grocery store started calling him the Bottle King. And he would earn $8 or $9 that way, which wasn't too shabby back in those days. Fritz said he somehow always knew he wouldn't have any trouble becoming successful. He went to school at Greenwood and later Roosevelt. Fritz was never a great student, though, probably because he realized there was so much more to be learned outside of school. He liked tinkering with things, mechanical things. As a kid, his mom once asked him if he wanted anything for Christmas, and he said, "Yes, I want a 1.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton gas engine," which he got and used to build himself a toy car and to try to motorize his lawnmower because he figured that would be a great efficiency. He could mow a lot more lawns that way, make a lot more dollars that way. A few years later, Fritz saw a 1955 Oldsmobile for sale for $200. It had been in an accident, it was damaged. He bought it at the age of 15, mind you, without his parents knowing about it. He bought it, took the entire thing apart, piece by piece, wanted to use it to build his own sports car, and wound up selling the leftover parts for $300, making a nice profit. After studying at Iowa State and Drake, and serving for a time in the military, it was time to launch into his career. You could say Fritz took over the family business, but in his case, you have to understand that bookbinding was a business that went back a long, long ways in his family. It was his great-great-grandfather, Ernst Herzberg, who first learned the art of bookbinding back in the mid-19th century. Learned it as a boy from monks in Germany. And this old-world craftsmanship was passed down through the generations across an ocean from father to son, and eventually came to Fritz. As a young man, he learned every aspect of the job, inside and out. In 1976, he acquired Library Binding Service, the company that had been started by his father. At the time, the business was kind of struggling. Old equipment, a leaky roof, customers who only sometimes paid their bills. But then Fritz came in, brought all kinds of new ideas, new equipment, new techniques, new innovations. He built a culture where, as he said, we always put our customer first. And everyone was treated with dignity, customers, vendors, employees. He spent virtually his entire career there, 40 years or more. Over time, he built it into a thriving, successful company, a leader in the industry. Fritz loved what he did so much, he only retired when he was 80. He sold the company to the employees, and it's still going strong today. Fritz wrote that he hoped Ernst Herzberg would be proud of his great-great-grandson, and I have no doubt in the world that he would, seeing that heritage continue down through the years. Of course, the other legacy that Fritz leaves behind is you all, his family. 7 children that he had. He was proud of them all. When I visited with him, he emphasized that. He told me at least a couple of times, they don't smoke or drink. So if any of you do, you manage to hide it pretty well from your dad. The kids agreed he was a lot of fun as a father. Unconventional, of course, not your typical dad. He gave them a lot of latitude, as he had enjoyed as a child. Wanted them to experience things, experience life. So he let the kids and later grandkids rollerblade all around the inside of the house, or race through it on tricycles, even with all kinds of beautiful furnishings, valuable artwork everywhere. Fritz didn't care. He was passionate about the outdoors and sharing that love with others, taking his family hiking in Colorado or up in Minnesota with his daughters. We'll hear a little more from Sarah about that in a bit. And, of course, his beautiful property down in Madison County. How he took those 100-something acres, restored the native prairie, built a beautiful cabin, preserved an old barn. This little piece of paradise that Fritz cultivated and shared with others. And he had a lifelong love of travel and adventure that started with his first trip to Europe back in 1959 as a young man with a couple of friends. Flew over on a TWA propeller plane from New York to Lisbon, 13-hour flight. They rented a car and drove 8,000 miles all over Europe, every country, immersing themselves in the culture, visiting museums, historic sites, art galleries, ballet, symphony, you name it. It was a life-changing experience for him. And of course, there would be a lot more adventures like that to come. Climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, exploring Africa with a net, the back streets of Mombasa or the town of Lamu, relishing the local culture and food, like Anthony Bourdain, before there was an Anthony Bourdain. And of course, the road rallies. I'm glad we have a picture of one of those here in front of us today. Driving his beautifully restored 1929 Ford Phaeton across the deserts of Mongolia and a heck of a lot of other places when he was up in his 70s doing that. Inspired by those experiences, Fritz left behind some wisdom for others in his memoir. Life is a rally, he wrote. gear up for it. There will be bumps in the road, sometimes no road at all. But enjoy the ride. I have, he wrote. Now, Fritz wasn't exactly religious in the conventional sense, but in his later years, he seemed perhaps more inclined toward things of the Spirit. He joined this church, Central, back in 1994, had his youngest children baptized here. But interestingly, it wasn't here in the Presbyterian church that he met Jesus, but at the Tasty Freeze down in Winterset. In his memoirs, Fritz writes about one experience he had a few years ago, a spiritual conversion of sorts. He'd stopped there at the Tasty Freeze, a place he frequented with his son Michael to grab a bite to eat. Got into a conversation with the owner. She said, "You know, Fritz, over the years, I've asked you 7 times to give your heart to Jesus. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I really hope you do it." Fritz said, "Okay, what do I have to do to give my heart to Jesus?" She said, "Just say I give my heart to Jesus." And so he did. Which, by the way, just so you know, is not really a typical Presbyterian kind of thing. That's not really the way we talk. And it wasn't a typical Fritz James kind of thing either, was it? His son was sort of baffled and or appalled by it a little bit. But Fritz said he and the owner's daughter all started crying together. She told him, "Now you're going to go to heaven." Again, not 100% sure about the theology there, but reflecting on it later, Fritz considered it to be a profound experience. Said he felt different afterwards. It was him expressing something that somehow he'd never quite put into words before. When one of our church staff members, Medea Saunders, visited him a few weeks ago, she brought over a prayer shawl knitted by some of the ladies here at the church, and that meant something to him. He had it wrapped around him when he died a few days ago, blanketed in faith and assurance and hope. When Fritz first met Medea, who used to be a hospice chaplain, he asked her, "Am I going to die?" And she told him, "Well, probably not today, but eventually, yes, you will." Which made him laugh, she said. They talked a bit about what happens after you die. Medea shared her beliefs, and Fritz shared his own. How he hoped that dying meant that his molecules would be bouncing around the universe in some form or fashion. One more grand adventure to relish. Of course, as Christians, we believe death isn't the end, especially in this Easter season when we celebrate the resurrection. God's way of showing us that God is more powerful than death. Death is not the end of the story. We belong to God not only in this life, but in life beyond death. And so we trust that even though Fritz's bodily existence has come to an end, his spirit lives on, the part of him that is eternal, held forever in God's love and God's light. I just want to close with a poem today by Mary Oliver. She was someone like Fritz, who was inspired by nature, filled with a sense of wonder, a zest for life. And her poem, The Summer Day, captures for me something that speaks to a time like this and to a life like Fritz's. Who made the world? She asks. Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, she concludes, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Surely everyone who knew Fritz James could testify that he lived his one wild and precious life fully and passionately, with style and vigor and grace. Amen. We'll now hear several people offer their own memories and remembrances, starting with Lang Whiteman from the lectern.
Good morning. This is a tough one. I'm honored to say that I knew Fritz for 50 years. It went by in just in a blink. With the exception of my family, certainly Fritz had the largest impact on my life, without a doubt, from the beginning all the way through. In 1973, I was out of the Navy, back in Jacksonville, Illinois, and back at Illinois College, making another attempt at graduating. That's another long story I want to get into. Was married, and Linda and I had a daughter, 5-year-old daughter, and it was go time. I needed to finish school and do something. So one summer, I needed a summer job. So lo and behold, I found a job at a bookbindery of all places. It's really interesting how things like that happen. How things, one little change and everything goes a different direction. So at the bookbindery, as a summer job, I was unloading trucks and doing stuff that summer student employees do. And it was a library binder. It was very labor intensive. In the summertime, there were a lot of books, school books that were rebound and reinforced. So it was a busy place with maybe 150 employees, just a whole bunch. And I was just one of the folks. And I saw Fritz. Fritz had an office. He was in charge of production. And I went out. I was around all the time and saw his office. And one day I looked out in the parking lot and I saw that he drove a BMW. And at that time, BMWs weren't on every corner. They were kind of unusual cars, especially in the Midwest, in Jacksonville especially. And it was an unusual model as well, so I figured, well, gosh, he's an auto enthusiast. And I just happened to have a 1952 MG that I dragged back from California, my last station in Long Beach. And I said, I'm just going to bring the MG in and park it in a conspicuous place and see if Fritz noticed. Well, it didn't take long because he was out looking at the thing, and I went out there and I introduced myself and we talked a bit. And we became friends almost immediately, and proceeded to go to auctions around the Midwest, and we would look in barns for the classic Duesenberg that might be out there somewhere or another. We just did what auto enthusiasts do, and it was one of those things that who knew mutual interest in autos would lead to Peking, Paris, trips to wild places in South America, and even in Africa. It was just a remarkable thing. After graduation, which I did do, I needed a job. And one day I was at Fritz's house, and he says, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." He says, "Why don't you come to work at Hertzberg New Method?" That was the name of the bookbinder, library bindery. He said, "Why don't you come to work at Hertzberg? And we'll put you through kind of a management program and also teach you bookbinding," because at that point I had just been unloading trucks. I hadn't to do with bookbinding. And I said, "Okay," it was just one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time. But who knew that it would lead to a lifetime personal and business relationship? Just remarkable. After a year or so I was there, Fritz moved to Des Moines, to the Library Binding Service. And it wasn't too long after he was in Des Moines that I got a call from him saying, "You're going to have a contact. You're going to get a contact from a company in western Iowa that wants to start a bookbindery." They already had a business there that sold materials to schools, elementary schools and high schools. And they said they want to start a bookbindery. So sure enough, I got a call, and within 6 months, moved the family to western Iowa, Logan, Iowa. And I was there for 6 years. Fritz and I kept in contact. We did rag ride together. We did our first rag ride was in 1980. You'd have thought we'd have won the Tour de France when we got to the other end of the state. It was just about killed us, but we made it. We took Ken and Michael, I think the next year, and we darn near killed Ken on that one, because I remember seeing his lips were blue after one day in the rain, and it was really cold. It was one of those things you don't forget, right, Ken? During that time, Fritz said, just kind of hang in there. He said, I've had some things I need to sort out at Library Binding Service, but one of these days I'm going to invite you over, to work there. And sure enough, in 1982, my family moved to Des Moines. At that point, the company was struggling, a little bit on the back foot. It was okay, but it needed a lot of TLC. To give you an example, at that point we had our county department was a bookkeeper, just one bookkeeper. And one day she ran into Fritz's office and said, "We're out of money," and ran back out. And Fritz was kind of calm and cool about it, and went, "Oh, boy, that's interesting," And what it really turned out was that sales were okay, but what wasn't okay, customers were not paying us. So Fritz got on the road and started calling customers, which he was not comfortable doing at all, saying, "You got to pay me." He was at one customer down in Texas, I believe, and the guy had some kind of classic automobile out front, and said, "I'm going to take that automobile if you don't pay me." And the guy said, "Okay, I'm going to pay you." So that's one way to get paid. We had a roof. It was an old building. It was the original bindery here in Des Moines on Grand Avenue. It was an old building. Roof leaked. One day we called in a contractor to take a look at it, and one of his feet fell through the roof, and you could see it from the production area. So we knew a new roof. It was for sure. But the one thing we always said about the building was, "Don't laugh, it's paid for," and that was something Fritz always took to his heart, not to get extended on financially, and he did an excellent job at that. It was who knew that the company would evolve into the most respected and dominant supplier in the book industry and develop 2 additional wonderful divisions. Pretty amazing. On hearing of Fritz's passing, I sent some messages to some of his rally friends in England, some people that he really loved. And I got this one response. I got all responses back, but I have one that I'd like to read to you. "Oh, Lang, I'm so very sorry to hear that. Fritz was a legend in our house, as were both the folks from Polk. We had Polk County plates, Iowa plates, and they saw Polk on there, so they called us folks from Polk. British humor, that's all I can say about that. Fritz was the loveliest man you could ever meet, always so calm, cheerful, and sage. I have very good memories of the last time we saw him in Iowa, and the happy day we had on the prairie. The irony of Fritz getting a puncture on his Discovery on the way back was so funny. What a jolly lunch we had at the John Wayne diner. The irony of the puncture on Fritz's car was that Henry, down here, picture was taken actually in Chile, I believe. Henry didn't get flats. We didn't do flats. We traveled, 17,000, 18,000 miles, and only had one puncture, and that was on the second to last day of our last rally. And our British friends were always amazed that we always came in one piece. They just couldn't believe it, because they were having the roads we were on and the old cars that we all drove were prone to all sorts of problems. And punctures was certainly one of them, and they were always really interested to see that we had no punctures. The year, I believe, was the year after I retired, which was in 2014, and I believe it was at commemorating Fritz's birthday, which is in February. The employees at LBS were asked to describe attributes of Fritz, and they put together quite a laundry list of descriptives. And I'd like to this is just a screenshot of the poster that I think that Fritz has at home, perhaps. Some of the descriptions are innovative, genuine, generous, passionate, adventurous, entrepreneurial, excellent, giving, respected, and it goes on and on. It's really remarkable. It's just what a legacy. I'd like to talk about a couple of those attributes. The first one is adventure. We all know that Fritz was adventurous. Peking, Paris, driving through the wilds of Bolivia, Africa, Kilimanjaro and things. But every trip that I would take with Fritz ended up being some type of adventure. A low-key thing, but one that was always stuck in our minds and was always something that we laughed and talked about. And we took one trip way back in the 80s before cell phones and GPS and things, back to Jacksonville to visit one of our customers. It was a trip that we made relatively often, maybe a couple times a year. And we were driving across the Mississippi River and decided we're just going to we're not going straight to Jacksonville, we're just going to get off the road and take some country roads and just kind of see what's out there. And off we went, kind of the bottomlands on the Illinois side of the river. And it was a secondary road for sure. And here was a sign that said rock shop on it, with an arrow pointing off on a dirt road. And Fritz said, rock shop, yeah, let's go. I said, oh, geez, all right. So I was driving, off we went on this dirt road, which ended up being a driveway, actually, but it meandered back through the woods and things, back into quite a ways, maybe a quarter mile back, and there was this house that was pretty dilapidated. It wasn't kind of a Hitchcock house, but it was getting right up there with kind of a weird place. And it had an outhouse and things, where they were outbuilding. And so we got out, and it didn't look like it wasn't a commercial. It was a house. It wasn't a commercial, business. And went up and knocked on the door. First thing, there were like a dozen cats all around our feet. And I'm a cat person, but this was a little strange. It was just more, and knocked on the door, and the door opened up, and here were these two older ladies, just smiling. They were so happy to see us. They said, come on in. So cats and all, we went in the house. And inside the house, it smelled like 24 cats. I mean, it was really interesting. And the living room was part of the set up for the rock shop. There were rocks everywhere, and they had a small glass counter with the rocks on it and things. And you take Fritz into an environment like that, and he's all in. He just wants to see everything. It's just after a while you go, oh no, not more rocks, that kind of thing. So he's looking at rocks, asking questions, and the two ladies, maybe sisters, and every question that Fritz would ask, one of the sisters would answer, and the other sister would say, that's completely wrong, and they get in this huge argument about the thing. And it was just really entertaining for a while. And I was looking around, and off in one corner there was a door that was about halfway open, and there was it was a bedroom, and you could see this unmade bed that was probably unmade for the last, I don't know, year and a half. I mean, it was the room was really grim, and my sixth sense said in it about then, maybe these ladies aren't alone. Maybe there's somebody else in here that we know. So then your mind starts heading off into axe murders and things. So I nudged Fritz, and I kind of pointed toward that, and he looked over at it, and he said, I could see right away he had the same feeling. Maybe we should move on. So he bought a couple rocks, and we were out the door along with the cats. We all left laughing because we had no. If there had been a problem, there probably wasn't. But if there had been a problem, they'd have never found us. I mean, we were just way off the chart, off from nowhere. We got back in the road and laughed about it all the way into Jacksonville, and actually laughed about it for years after that. It was just one of those genuine Fritz experiences that if I'd have been by myself, I wouldn't have gone to that rock shop. wouldn't have done it. But it was something that made every trip with him, and the people who traveled with him that were in this room could acknowledge that was kind of what he did. He was also a leader. He led LBS, Library Binding Service, turned to the name LBS, through a complete transformation because of technology had changed our industry. As a supplier of materials to library binderies, technology was flipping and disrupting the industry significantly. And without his leadership and the changes we had to make, it had been a real problem. The company business was based on probably 90% library binders. And by the end of that transformation, there were probably maybe 10% of the business was library binders. We had to change what we did. We had to change how we marketed products. We had to develop new products, which Fritz led the way, to completely reinventing ourselves. And he did it. And because of that, the company is alive and well and growing every day today. He was also a visionary. If you could have seen his property down in Madison County when he first bought it, it was just a field of scrubby, tangled rose bushes, rose thorns and things. It was just a mess. You walk around there and you rip your clothes. And it was, it didn't look like much to me, to be honest. And we would just wander through the woods, and he would point out what he was going to do here and there and around things. And if he could have done a time lapse on that from back then, 20 years or so, I guess, probably, to now, you'd just be stunned. A couple years ago, some friends and I, Fritz invited us down to ride our bicycles down there and camp overnight on his land, around his cabin. And my friends and I as well were just stunned about the light in the evening and in the mornings there. It was just, it's an extraordinary place. And he had the vision to see that when at the time it wasn't much, to be honest. It was land, but that was about all he could say about it. It's more than land today, it's a legacy. Passion and commitment. It seemed that whatever Fritz did in life, he did with passion and full commitment. You all know Fritz, and each of you could come up here and give examples. But I believe he saved the most passion and commitment to his family. He loved to talk about you all the time, and he loved you so much. Rest in peace.
What is life but a collection of memories that connects us all together? Moments pass unnoticed, but turn into cherished times, etched forever in our minds. There are the little memories. My dad and I used to share Twix bars at gas stations, Junior Mints at the movies, and one time we shared an enormous bowl of onion rings at the Drake Diner. That was only once, because we both shared a stomach ache afterward. We used to go walking in the streams of Brown's Woods, and we went to the fair every year, sometimes even twice in one day. I tolerated my dad's love of staring at tractors for hours, and he tolerated my love of the tilt-a-whirl. We both ate more than our share of corn dogs. I fondly remember my dad's goofy dances and funny little songs. I remember his sense of humor, his sense of adventure and curiosity, and his perpetual optimism. Some of the most important and treasured memories are of my family. My dad had 7 children who are all unique and talented people, and I've always felt incredibly lucky to be part of this group. We gathered year after year at my dad's home. We cooked together and shared food, laughter, stories, and the feeling of togetherness. We spent time at the farm together, my dad's prairie, and enjoyed nature and the adventures of being outdoors. When I was 8 and my sister was 5, my dad took us to the North Woods of Minnesota and Canada. This was the start of many great adventures and a yearly trip, and truly some of the best times of all of our lives. My dad had always had freedom and a sense of adventure. My dad was unfazed by the thought of taking 2 little girls into the wilderness. His eternal sense of optimism allowed him to not even think anything could go wrong. Lucky for us, just enough went wrong to form some amazing memories, but nothing serious enough that we didn't make it out. Like my sister with her feet covered in leeches, or my dad being chased by a curious moose, or me diving into a stream to escape attacking wasps. But we explored the wilderness, saw the northern lights, experienced a huge meteor shower, and saw bears, loons, and beavers, and we loved every minute. Even though my dad, Fritz, is gone, all of us have a lifetime of memories that we shared with him. He will live in all of our hearts for all of the time that we are here on this earth.
Morning. Thank you all for coming. I want to talk about three topics, 3 things. I'm not going to talk about Fritz's life so much as some of the lessons that we can learn from it. I'm going to basically give a brief, very unusual public service announcement. I'm going to talk about Fritz's last few years, and then I'm going to talk about a decision that Fritz made recently. Okay, the public service announcement is this. If you're over the age of 50, get a shingles vaccine. It's very important. Most of us have a virus living in us that we got a long time ago when we were little, when we had chicken pox, and it still lives in our bodies and it's still there. When you get older, it has the possibility of causing shingles. And that's what Fritz lived with for the last 5 years, over 5 years. Shingles is something that attacks the nerves in your body. However, it can attack it to the point where it damages them, and that's what happened to Fritz. The nerves were damaged to the point where he had level 10 pain 100% of the time. It's very difficult at that point to solve. There's not very much you can do about it when it comes to medical. But the one thing that we had to do as a family is we had to figure out how to help Fritz. That's the end of the public service announcement. So managing shingles. So we knew as a family that we had to help Fritz through this. This is medically, there was not a lot that could be done, so we had to gather our resources together and come up with a plan. We're doctors, we're lawyers, we're nurses, we're professionals in science, so we figured we could do this. The one thing that our family has that was key was we had Mia, my wife, and 3 things about her that are extremely valuable in this situation. Number one, an unwavering commitment to our family. Number two, the belief that there's always a solution. And number three, a whole lot of tenacity. Mia worked to get Fritz to the Mayo Clinic, which I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. It's not easy. If you were applying to NASA to be an astronaut, there would probably be less forms than trying to get you to Mayo Clinic, but she did it. Unfortunately, Mayo Clinic said there wasn't a lot they could do. They talked about things like drilling holes in his skull and things like that, which we said, okay, that's not going to work out. So we went to the next step, and the next step was a pain clinic at Mayo Clinic. And a pain clinic basically means that you go there and you learn how to manage your pain yourself, and you figure it out. You use relaxation, meditation. This probably wasn't aligned perfectly with what Fritz wanted to do. And he lasted about 2 days because he realized that it just wasn't going to be a whole lot of fun. Mia did eventually locate a pain management specialist who had worked with patients in third world countries that had nerves damaged by parasites, and that was very frequent in those countries. And so it became a solution. However, the management of it was heavily drug-related, and it also caused a diminishment in Fritz's ability to do a lot of things. He couldn't drive. He was tired, sleepy, sort of diminished capacity. And so Mia helped him for 4.5 years. Sometimes she was there just a couple hours a day, and sometimes she was there for 8, 10, 12, 14 hours. What Mia taught Fritz and what she taught us was that commitment to family is necessary. That commitment to family is powerful. And that commitment to family is perhaps the most fundamental and important commitment that we all possess. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to a decision that Fritz made a few days ago. Fritz decided to take one thing with him on his final journey. He didn't take a ring. He didn't take a watch. Instead, he took instructions on how to plant a seed. He asked his daughter Sarah to make it for him, and he wanted it folded and put into his pocket to take with him on his journey. Fritz could never really articulate why he did that, but he was clear that the instructions would serve him well. So I asked members of his family why they thought he would take those instructions with him. Lydia, his granddaughter, said that he needed the instructions to remember his farm and the prairie that he had planted and nourished. It was as if that when he arrived at his destination, all of his cares and his worries would be gone, but that he would need a reminder about what had been important to him, and that he could recreate that again. Others thought Fritz was concerned that his new life might be drab or boring. Sort of like heaven would look like a New Yorker cartoon that was drawn in black ink on a white background, and that he would need to add color and design and aesthetic. Others thought that growing seeds would provide Fritz with a purpose, something to nourish, something to care for. A continuation of the many projects that he nourished throughout his life, his business, his prairie, and others. Colin said that Fritz was a farmer at heart, and he just needed to continue his work. I believe that Fritz carried instructions on how to plant a seed is a combination of all these things. I think Fritz came to realize that life came down to about 4 principles. Know your purpose. I think Fritz was a farmer at heart. You can carry seeds of happiness wherever you go. It's best to sow seeds that benefit others. And of course, always carry an unwavering commitment to your family and to your friends.
We had a wonderful grandfather, one who never really grew old. His smile was made of sunshine, and his heart was solid gold. His eyes were as bright as shining stars, and his cheeks fair roses you see. We had a wonderful grandfather, and that's the way it will always be.
If ever there is a tomorrow when we're not together, there is something you must remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. But the most important thing is when we're apart, I'll always be with you.
Let us now commend Fritz to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer. O God, you are the maker of all that is, of this wonderful world and all that is in it, of our bodies, our minds, our souls. Everything that we have, everything that we are, comes from you and belongs to you. We thank you, gracious God, for sharing Fritz's life with us, for the love he shared with his family, for his entrepreneurial spirit, his long and successful career in business, for the joy he found in travel and adventure, in art and culture and design, for his deep appreciation for the natural world and his careful stewardship of the land, for the ways that he was involved in the Des Moines community and contributed to its betterment, for his intelligence, his curiosity about the world, his zest for life, for all that Fritz has given us to make us what we are, for that of Fritz which lives and grows in each of us, and for his life that in your love will never end. We give you thanks. Eternal God, we now entrust Fritz to your merciful care. Shelter him in your eternal safekeeping. Let perpetual light shine upon him, and keep his memory burning brightly in each of us. Amen. And as Jesus taught us, so now let us pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. And now, friends, as you go from here today and in the days to come, may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord's face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord's countenance be lifted upon you and give you peace, now and forever. Amen.